Okay, I see us live on the screen of the
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, our special program this evening. I'm Eric Marco, and I will be the host for this evening. I have three wonderful panelists that will be the, the main speakers for this occasion, and they will cover the topic from different angles. Our topic is about vaccines. It is about the accessibility of vaccines. It is about the quality of vaccines. It is about the effect of vaccines and the reliability of vaccines, and also the safety of vaccines. So that, in a nutshell, is what it's about. And we've got with us this evening Dr. Llewellyn McMaster, the moderator of the Uniting Reformed Church of Southern Africa, the Cape Regional Synod. We have Professor Tuzamu Dubula, and he is from a number of universities in South Africa. He's a scientist and a medical doctor, and he will be giving us an interesting angle that helps us to understand the scientific background to all of this. And then we have Dr. Karel Wilskut, a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, and been dealing with this matter and thinking through this over a long period of time, and developed a number of mechanisms that we can use to deal with COVID as an extremely problematic pandemic that, as a nation, but also in the global village, we are struggling with. And so I'm really honored to have all three of you here on the panel this evening. I'm really honored, and we're also very appreciative of the fact that the church decided to host this discussion, and the topic, simple topic, vaccines, and all the varying issues that relates to vaccines. And I want to stop my short introduction, and I want to allow my expert panelists to introduce themselves. And they will do it in two ways. They will tell us about their own professional background, but more particularly, they will actually begin to deal with the matter of vaccines, provide us with some clarity around these issues, and also lay the foundation for the discussion that's going to take place further. Beyond their introductions, we will then have a series of discussions. I'm going to invite the audience and people that have joined the webinar to also send in their questions so that we can have a real healthy discussion for the next hour. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And let me immediately hand over to Dr. Llewellyn McMaster, the moderator of the church that also initiated the conversation for this evening. You're welcome.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you to my brothers who are participating. In the interest of time, I think everyone knows me, so I'm not going to spend much time to give you background. My role, I think, is just to put some theological pointers or points on the table for us, because we are people of faith. And whatever we do, we respond to all issues from a faith perspective. I'm not going to say much. The short presentation that I have prepared will be available also for people to contact the scribe if they're interested in that. But yes, our lives has been changed significantly, dramatically, and I think also permanently. The well-known Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann released a book last year, Virus as a Summons to Our Faith. And he speaks about the fact that we are all vulnerable together in this virus. I'm not going to talk about the next slide, which is just giving the statistics and that we all know. So I'm skipping that one. I think the church is all about people, lives and livelihoods, as well as interpersonal relationships. And that, I think, is the interpretive or hermeneutical lens that we will always use to include that when we discuss the impact also of the virus on human lives. And it has been a devastating impact, as we see from Rabbi Nahum Ward Levi in his introduction or foreword on Brueggemann's book. He talks about the devastating effects of the virus that are indeed summoning us to renew our covenantal relationship with God and to renew our responsibilities within that relationship. In the next slide, I just say which are the documents that I am referencing. And then the next one, it's the points that I will briefly just elaborate on. The first being that human beings or humanity are co-creators with God. The second one is the sanctity of human life. The third one, love for our neighbor. And then just a few other points, vaccine as a justice issue and countering misinformation. And the last point is religious freedom. Now, when we look at the point of human beings as co-creators of God, I think Genesis 1 is, for me, a foundational text when it comes to a lot of issues. The fact that we are created in the image of God, the fact that God created us as his representatives with a very clear mandate and calling and tasks that we read about in Genesis. And so we say that we, and that includes scientists, are co-creators with God. That's a very important point for me. But we keep in mind when we have the discussion that vaccine is not the savior. God remains our savior. The third point just on this is when we read in the Bible, God saying to Adam and Eve that you must have dominion over the earth, that you must subdue. From a pastoral point of view, I know there's also, John Patton writes about it, interpretation that says that means taking care of creation, not just ruling and having dominion over it, but taking care of the earth. So the second point, the sanctity of human life. From the SACC document, you see there, there's a quotation that I have, understanding or the fact that we have lost too many lives, says that document, due to the pandemic. And it says, every life is important and livelihoods help sustain life with dignity. So let us preach and act holistically for the sanctity of human life. I'm just leaving it there. The next point that on this sanctity of life that we want to highlight is that we follow our Lord Jesus Christ. We've shown and demonstrated the compassion of God in his earthly ministry and his interaction with people. So it is the compassion of Christ that must motivate us and help us to come to a decision to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. The third point is the love for our neighbor. We know Jesus's new command in John 13, verse 34 and 35. But also coupled with that, the fact that Jesus says, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. We must keep that in mind in whatever we do in our behavior in the time of the virus. It's for me very key that we as Christians and as church understand and live that. I've read what Mandy Smith, who's a pastor at the Christian University Christian Church in Cincinnati, writes. She says, if there's one thing that the pandemic has shown us, it is that our lives, our bodies, and health are interwoven. So we can't escape that fact. The fourth point, just the justice issue connected with the issue of vaccination. And that's important for the church. So we look at the fact that we also look globally at what the rich north is doing in terms of accumulating, the vaccines. But we also look at what has happened in our own country in terms of corruption with the PPEs. And we say we must be vigilant as a church that this remains a justice issue for us. The next point is the fact of misinformation. The church can't be silent in the light of the misinformation with regard to conspiracy theories and fake news. And even our general synods exec in their communique to us says, we are calling on all congregants to resist false information and seek only reputable sources of information about vaccines. And I think lastly, the point of religious freedom. From the SACC document, we read, as Christians, we believe in freedom of choice. We should not force the vaccine down the throats of our congregations or congregants. Their membership of and standing in the church should not be affected by the decision that they take on the vaccine. And lastly, in this regard, from Mandy Smith, as Christians, we need to have space for difference of opinions. And she says unity in essentials, liberty in non-essentials, and in all things love. And on a philosophical level, our opinion about vaccines, she says, is non-essential. In other words, people don't lose their salvation because of the decision. But she says also we must be careful not to split the church on our difference in opinion. And in a conclusion, the development of the COVID-19 vaccine should be viewed, and I subscribe to what the SACC in their document says, and it includes our church also, should be viewed as a major milestone in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The vaccine represents the best hope to save lives in the midst of the pandemic. As a church, as its leadership, we are saying we cannot make decisions for our individual members, but we can provide you as far as possible with all the necessary information, provide enough safe spaces for you to express your opinion, your fears, as well as your hopes. And lastly, we promise, and that's our commitment, that we will pastorally accompany you, whatever your views and your stand are. Thank you.
I thank you, Dr. McMaster, for a very well thought through theological framework in which you locate our discussion this evening. I will come back to some of the points that you have raised, but I want to move directly on to Dr. Carl Wilskut that brings another dimension, both of health, the medicine, but also our psychiatry into this discussion. Sir, you're most welcome. We eagerly listen to your presentation.
Thank you, Reverend. So my name is Carl Wilskut. I'm a psychiatrist here in Cambridge in the UK. And some of you may have seen me on short videos I've disseminated, in which I tell you exactly what happens after you receive the vaccine. There's another one in the pipeline because my next appointment is on the 9th of April. My interest is treating people over 65 with psychiatric problems and with dementias. And my other special interest is psychotherapies, and particularly cognitive analytic therapy, which is a relational type of psychotherapy. Looks at the relationships that you have with yourself and the relationships between yourself and everybody else and everything else. And if you look at your life through that lens, then you become aware of things that may have been in your blind spot before. And we can be in relation to anything. And it's obvious to me that this relationship that we are now in with COVID or the pandemic, it's almost it's almost difficult to think of it interchangeably, because COVID is the pandemic is COVID. It's all about COVID. And it has been enforced upon us. We were completely blindsided. If we take a look back in the last 10, 20 years, then yes, we will discover that there have been films made about a pandemic situation and the likely responses. And I have to say, some of them are quite accurate. But, you know, what were the chances? The probability of that happening in our lifetimes to us, we probably thought that it wouldn't happen. But a year ago, in February, we were taking a break in Edinburgh, and we saw it coming. We saw the inevitable coming on, and that's when we started to wear masks, and when we started to disengage with our usual gang of friends and my relatives in the north of England, because we understood that, you know, the trickle will become a flood and we will become engulfed if we don't take cover. Now, in order to acquire that sort of preparedness requires you to do regular reflection. It's not too late. I think it's good to get into the habit of reflecting on your life, how things have gone so far, what the future might hold, but not with a sense of misery or despair, but in a way that informs your forward planning for your life and what actions to take. And so naturally, for me, the most pragmatic thing to do to escape the clutches of this pandemic is to get myself vaccinated. And that's not just because the opportunity is there. I also consider it a matter of a professional matter and a matter of compassion for my family and for my community at large. It's quite a responsible thing to do as far as I'm concerned. So let's talk about the relationship issue, because let's face it, we didn't want COVID in our lives, but there it is. We are standing in relation to COVID, whether that relationship is conflicted or distant, or unwanted or unpleasant, but we cannot deny the fact that we are standing in relationship to that. And it's difficult to have a relationship with a virus if you think about it, because it's a string of proteins, amino acids, if we think about it technically, but yet it's exerting such a massive influence on our lives. It has inspired governments to put very restrictive measures, which we feel infringe our liberties. That's one way of looking at it, about how we have been deprived of the normal things of life, like the ability to go to work, to meet friends on the beach, or have parties and funerals as per usual. So all of those things are a result of directly the responses from government, but their hands have been forced by the effects of the pandemic, because if they didn't do anything, then I think we would be in a more disastrous position now. And we can actually see that when we look at how different countries dealt with it. Countries which locked down hard and early seem to have a fairly low rate of infection and low rates of death, and we all admire them for that. but the measures they took were very intrusive in some countries. And personally, I don't particularly like that idea. But here we are. So how can we escape the harms of this relationship that we're in? Because let's face it, it is a harmful relationship. If you know, if you have experienced a harmful relationship before, you know that it makes you feel trapped, it makes you feel angry, it makes you feel anxious, it makes you feel cut off from your resources and your abilities. And I wonder if one of the ways in which we can relate to this pandemic and this virus is via dialogue through ourselves, because dialogue between people is one of the elements of um, self. This is how ourselves are formed. It's in relationships, especially using dialogue. Whether that dialogue has happened in the past or currently, it's only words, you know, movement of air between two people. But it has a profound impact on us because we are here talking about a very, very serious pandemic. And that's how we are forming this relationship tonight, by discussing something that's kind of out there, but also in immediate proximity. And therein lies, hopefully, the solution in forming a shared language about this relationship that we have towards the pandemic and possible escape routes. Vaccination is one of the obvious ones, but I think the other one that's very, very important is the misinformation that's out there. How do we jointly access the most reliable, consistent information, which will change over time? That's a given. And also, um, how can we offload, as a result of this conflict situation that we're in with this virus? And those are the questions that I hope you will continue to think about and use in your network to try and explore the qualities of this ever evolving relationship. Um, and one of the overly simplistic ways I would like to think of this is when you're in a bullying relationship. I don't know how many of you have experienced bullying, maybe at school or at workplace, but you get the sense that you are disempowered. And the more you give in to the bully, the more they demand. And eventually you have to do something to escape that or to stand up for yourself. And maybe that's an overly simplistic way to look at it, but at least it could be a start. But this is my thing. I want people to think about the relationship towards COVID and towards the pandemic and share the ideas that we come up with, form ideas together and share them widely, and also adjust them as time goes on. And also try to build in regular time for reflection to understand the things that may uh, take place in the future, things that we can't predict or aim to predict, but things that we can factor in and plan for so as to minimize the impact to ourselves and to those around us. And I'd be quite happy to take more questions of this, but I'm aware that we have a really, really expert panel tonight, and I'm grateful to be here talking to you tonight about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilskut. And we're going to, I think a lot of questions are just coming through. Prof, we've got about 5 questions already down below for you, even before you started. But I welcome you to the panel, and I welcome you to do your short introductory remarks. I think you are inundated with a whole lot of questions, both theological and with regard to science itself. So Prof. Dubula, welcome, and over to you, sir.
Nelson Mandela Academy.
There we go. We just got you in now. I wonder if the rest of us can maybe just for now also switch our cameras off and then allow, maybe there will be a better link up. Let's switch our cameras off.
Must I switch mine as well? Yeah, so I've been, currently based at Walter Sisulu University, Department of Internal Medicine. So as you would know, the medical wards have borne the biggest brunt of the infections with COVID-19 disease. And as part of the fight against it, we've got a unit, a research unit here that participated in the phase 3 Johnson & Johnson clinical trial on the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which I will talk about later on. Yeah. So we recruited patients from around this area. It was one of the 2 centers that were involved in the Eastern Cape. So I'm sure we know that the statistics in terms of the burden of the disease, both nationally and worldwide. And of interest that more than 11,000 patients have died in the Eastern Cape, and the number is equally high around the Western Cape, more than 11,000 of the people who have died from COVID-19 related disease in the 2 provinces out of the 52,000 people that have died. So the biggest issue about COVID-19 has been the burden it has on mortality, in that even though most people present with mild disease, though when it gets into someone who's vulnerable, the risk of death, it becomes even higher. Okay. So the risk of death becomes even higher for those who are vulnerable. So basically, diabetes mellitus, those with the risk of COVID-19 infection, in which risk of death has affected mostly those people in terms of death. The will help prevent this and put our have helped to the extent, but we know that if we're going to quagmire, find ourselves currently in other, the best option is mission.
Prof, I want to ask whether we can just stop you for a minute. Your presentation is breaking up, and there's such a lot of important points that you're raising. Okay, you've just taken your camera off. So let's see whether it will work better without the camera.
Yeah, so basically we know that the vaccine is our best hope so far to prevent the transmission of the disease. So that there's been a rapid acceleration of the development of vaccines to try and deal with this infection. Actually, the rate of development has been the highest compared to any other epidemic or pandemic that has engulfed the world so far. So so far there's about 13 types of vaccines that have been approved worldwide. And if I were to come back to South Africa, one of the issues was that the first vaccine that was approved was the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was due to be started on healthcare workers before it gets rolled on into the frontline workers before going into the rest of the population. But because the virus, like any other living organism, It looks at ways of adapting to be able to live in its ecosystem. So there's the development of the so-called variants, with the first one in South Africa having been identified during the rise of the second wave of the pandemic. And actually that variant made it difficult for the initial vaccine to be able to be preventative enough against mild to moderate disease of COVID. That is why there was a change from the initial AstraZeneca vaccine into the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has been sort of used to vaccinate the healthcare workers. The other issue is the process that has to be taken before any drug or any medicinal product is given to people in society within the country. There's got to be a rigorous scientific review before it is approved to be used. So the AstraZeneca vaccine had taken that route for emergency use. But now with the introduction of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there was not enough time to use our healthcare authorities to get full approval of this vaccine. And hence it was applied as some form of a study to look at the long-term surveillance of how good this vaccine is. The main difference between the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the other vaccines is that this one, you get it as a single shot, or the single jab is what they refer to. And all the other vaccines require 2 jabs. The advantage of 2 jabs, or basically the advantage of those with 2 jabs, is that the second jab tends to increase how the body responds to the initial vaccine that they got. But the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been proven to be as efficacious as those that take sort of 2 jabs in terms of its the efficacy. So it works well to prevent disease. And actually, all the studies that have been done, they have shown that the risk of severe disease, people who have to be admitted in ICU, is markedly reduced in patients who have been vaccinated. And so far, there's been it has been shown that no people have died in those trials because of COVID after having received the vaccine. So the risk of severe disease or even death from COVID becomes markedly reduced when people have been given the COVID vaccine. The other issue has been the risk of side effects. So most of the technology that has been used to develop most of these vaccines has used the parts of the vaccine that has been tried in other sort of diseases to try and develop vaccines. And the effect that has been seen in those that have been tried has been mainly mild symptoms like headache, feeling flu-like, and it's been mainly mild headache and maybe some gastrointestinal problems. But basically everybody or most people have responded, have become better and well within about 24 hours after the onset of those symptoms. So there has been no severe side effects that has been seen after vaccination with these vaccines. The other question is what will be the long-term effects? And honestly, nobody can tell you exactly what is going to happen. But extrapolating from what these components have been used in vaccination in other programs, for instance, in things like the Ebola disease and all of that, there seems like the risk of long-term side effects from these vaccines are very minimal. So they are seen to be quite safe, but we still have to monitor and watch them going forward. I think, those are the issues I wanted to raise. I will take further questions as they come, but I think that the main issue is that vaccination seems to be the only way out of the quagmire we find ourselves in. And the more people we vaccinate, the better, to try and achieve that herd immunity and make sure that the risk of more people getting severe disease is as limited as possible, so that the healthcare services can tolerate or can work well with smaller numbers of people, unlike what almost happened in the first wave, in which most people came into the healthcare services all at once with severe disease. And the effect of these vaccines in the long term and the need for revaccination, if needs be, will be seen depending on how the long-term effects are. I think I will stop there, and thank you, Reverend.
I thank you, Prof, for covering such key issues, and you will see, colleagues, if you check on the chat group, there are a number of questions that have already been raised. So, Prof, while I have you on the, I want to just check with you, are there other new advanced symptoms that these are there, that we should know about with regard to the vaccine, besides those that we already know?
So in terms of the symptoms of the disease, that there's no new symptoms that sort of signify advanced disease or severe disease, except that we know that people do not all present in a similar or the same way. Some people may have shortness of breath and problems related to the lungs much more than the others. And some people have had even developed the clots in their body, be it the brain, the lungs, the heart, or even the limbs, as the manifestation of their illnesses. Then there's the interesting concept of people having relatively mild disease or not very sick, but after they have recovered, they develop the so-called long COVID, in which they develop tiredness, the so-called brain fog, in which their memory and how they think and all of that cannot sort of work as well as they would like to be. In terms of the vaccine, there has been no symptoms, long-term symptoms associated with introduction of the vaccine. So most of the people have had mild symptoms for 24 to 48 hours and then recovered quite well.
Thank you very much. I mean, the point that you do make is that vaccine is the one solution that can reduce the impact of COVID across nations and across communities. And it's important that we use that. I think this question, you're probably going to throw up your hands and say, I'm not sure, but there's a question that came in from one of our colleagues and says, how do we explain that you have an 80-year-old that survived the third pandemic, and then there are people young as 20 that die as a result of COVID infections? Is there any explanation? Is it random?
There's no explanation, in short. We know that basically there's been tendencies in that people who are older with all the comorbidities are at risk of severe disease and death. But for some reason, younger people, especially with the second wave, that had severe disease and died. Actually, interestingly, some people develop severe disease and still recover. So that there's no, maybe you would say it's a toss of a coin. Nobody knows where the direction each person will take as an individual when they get infected with COVID. Some may have mild disease, some may have moderate disease, and some may have severe disease. Some with severe disease may recover, and unfortunately, others never recover.
Thank you very much. Dr. McMaster, and I'm sure Dr. Wilskut, you're going to chip in here as well, especially your very interesting approach of dialogue and discussion, and allowing ourselves to understand how we should respond to relationships. So I'm going to read the question to you. How do we justify, in relation to the instructions of Jesus Christ sending the Comforter to us, saying that we can heal the sick? What is the place of medical science now in relation to the healing capacity of the Holy Spirit. Dr. McMaster, I think you're going to come in with a theological response, and then Dr. Wilskut, please help us through, because I know you are also a deeply spiritual man, so you're going to help us through that as well.
Yeah, I've posted also the point which is was my first point, actually, from a theological point of view. I've posted on the Facebook comments, and that is my understanding. You know, that is how we theologically and biblically look at the fact that God has appointed us as his representatives, that he has given Adam and Eve from the very beginning the ability, but also the responsibility to care for the earth. As I say, I choose from a pastoral theological point of view, care rather than rule or dominion. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a line that in a sense, what the question does, and I don't want to sound geleerd here, is maybe a reductionist point of view to say that, you know, the Holy Spirit is there. But any person, any one of us who is honest about life will know there's more to that. Yes, we trust, and that is why we also said, I said, as part of my presentation, that our trust is not in the vaccine, but in God. But we cannot deny the fact that God has given us, and he has given scientists and doctors and people in different fields the knowledge. And we see how the knowledge has developed to make the world a better place. So for me, there's no tension between that. We continue to pray. We continue to trust in the Holy Spirit. But let us be honest and realistic about, when we look at history, that God has always used human beings and the knowledge that he imparts on us and the gifts that he has given us to be co-rulers and co-stewards of the earth.
Dr. Wilskut, do you want to add something quickly before I throw another question at you?
Well, yes. So I often remind, well, occasionally, if I want to needle my atheist colleagues and friends, that they are doing God's work, you know, by advancing science to make us healthier and live longer. That's our business. And I think one of the prominent examples of, you know, a religious figure relying on science is probably the example of Pope John Paul II, who survived an assassination attack. Now, when he was shot, we all know what happened. He was taken to the hospital in acknowledgement that there is a better way, a more pragmatic way to get him back on his feet, to continue God's work as he did. And that's the simple answer to it. And I suppose if you want to answer any question, and then you'll end up with different answers, whether you go to a religious text for the answer or a scientific text. And these two things you can hold both ideas if you want, but it depends what the question is and where we look for the answers. If we want to amalgamate the two, then we are going to end up conflicted and confused. So we must be very, very clear where we're looking for answers, what we're looking for, and what the objective is. But any advancement in science, I think, could gain significant meaning if you look at it through a religious lens. So it's not necessarily incompatible with your existing religion.
Thank you very much. Prof, please kick off this answer. And I'm going to ask all three of you to respond to it as well. How do we deal with this unknown? You know, we have the COVID out there. We have all the related fears that go and accompany it. We have the rapidly changing set of environments within both the scientific world and our own context is changing. how do we deal with all of these unknowns? How did you guys deal with it when you were sitting there and putting all these bits and pieces together and working and testing the vaccines? And together with that, if I've received the vaccine, do I still have to wear a mask? Can we go off for a moment, just switch our cameras off, because I think it's easier for the professor to speak to us without us on camera.
I think in any environment, when there's a change in what used to be done sort of usually or previously, and when there's a change in how things are done, you get a flurry of information from all walks of life, so to say, and sometimes they may be conflicting, and generally it may not be that easy to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. And the interesting thing about science in general is that it takes what it has evidence for as the right way to approach things at that particular point in time. And with time, depending on how much new evidence comes up, it tends to change itself. I think a classical example was that at the beginning of the pandemic, it was not really sure if wearing a mask would be useful or would be important for everybody. But with time, science was there to show that wearing of a mask is important. So information, there's been a rapid flurry of information. So the issue is about trying to get information from as authentic bodies as possible and well-validated information as possible. And every information, there has to be a way of putting it out to the jury to decide if it is indeed true or not. But I mean, the issue of false information, so to say, if I may to put it like that, it is the likelihood is always there, and sometimes it becomes difficult for people to discern what is right from what is wrong, what is true from what is false. But people of authority, so to say, in the various fields around you may be another source to try and help you to discern what is right and what is wrong as an individual. To come directly to the issue of a mask after vaccination, just to remember that these vaccines have been tested to check if they are good enough against people with moderate to severe disease and the risk of death. So basically, they may not be that effective against mild disease, or to put it clearly, they have not been tested against mild disease. So if you were to get a vaccine, there's nothing that says you are likely to get, there's nothing that says what's your chance of getting mild disease. And if you were to get that mild disease, you may transmit it into someone who's vulnerable, who's not been vaccinated, and that person may get moderate to severe disease, and the risk of severe disease and even death in them, it might be higher. So the issue of mask may go beyond an individual into trying to protect the population or society at large. I think I will end there for now. I think there was another question, if I were to, about the herd immunity within your environment and the need to vaccinate. Yeah, I think it came earlier on. I think the issue about if you've had mild disease before, it's not really clear what antibody profile or how high your antibodies will go, and therefore how well your body is immune or has reduced the risk of getting this virus. And we know for a fact that there are people who had the virus during the first wave, and those who still developed the disease during the second wave. And unfortunately, some of them couldn't tolerate the disease during the second wave and succumbed. So the understanding is that if you vaccinate after having had an infection, it may improve your antibody profile and therefore protect you from future risk even better. I think I'll end there for now.
Anybody else want to add to that initial question? Then let me move on to another question, and it's again, it's Cheryl Simon. She asked, how accurate was the vaccine developed if COVID-19 related death patients were not sent for autopsy but wrapped and being taken away either for burial or cremation? So where does the research info really come from? That's a question related to people that died of COVID. And Prof, just a quick question from your quick response from your side, because then I'm going to move over to some theological questions that I want to ask Llewellyn to respond to, Prof.
Perhaps
There's
I
one
could come
group
in. Okay, we're back. Sorry.
One group you will give the other group you will not. Groups which are quite similar in many instances.
Okay, Prof, we're losing you. I'm going to ask Dr. McMaster if he can help us through through this question. You raised it in your 5 initial points that you raised, Dr. McMaster, and that is the accessibility has been very evasive, especially to the third, the newly developed countries, so countries that are still going through stages of development in comparison to the North, and accessibility to vaccines. Have you got anything that you want to add to that? Because I think it's important for us in South Africa, while we're discussing the whole question of rollout, is also the question of access, because together with not getting access, there's also so many myths and fake news that does its rounds.
Yeah, I don't think I'm in a position to give proper answer on that. But to say, in my view, there are certain realities, and COVID is as just as we have been saying from the beginning, also exposed some of the historic fault lines with regard to inequality and with regard to the first world nations and their exploitation of countries in the third world, so-called third world, and so forth and so forth. I think that unfortunately has not disappeared, and that is why, as part of the church's prophetic role, we cannot be quiet about that. We also need the information from our economists and people like that, members of the church with that knowledge, to help us also, again, to be alert and vigilant with regard to the broader systemic factors that intersect with what people are experiencing on personal and interpersonal ways. So that must be part of how we view this. It's all I can say on that particular point.
Thank you very much. I want we've got limited time left, but I want to ask Dr. Wilskut. You were vaccinated yourself. You're in a country where more than 25 million people have been vaccinated. What are those positive messages that you want to just share with us, coming coming from the UK and how we can almost begin to understand what is happening over there?
So I think we're up to what, just under 30 million by now. Yesterday, they vaccinated over 800,000 people in the day, which is a tremendous performance. And I do feel privileged to have this opportunity. There are also people who use this privilege to reject the virus and to opt out of it, which is their personal choice as well. The other thing I would say is that one of the themes that keep recurring in these discussions about, is the vaccine safe? You know, did somebody really die of COVID, etc., etc. I can't answer the technical questions about how hospitals deal with the dead and with post-mortem examinations, where it's warranted or where not. But the key question is about trust. You know, where did this distrust come from? And I want to acknowledge the historical research abuses that took place. Maybe we weren't directly affected, or maybe, as the case may be, we were, because only recently did we hear about genetic samples from the Nama and from the Zulu population that were donated by my university to the Sanger Institute just a few miles down the road here. And some kind of dispute arose, and I'm not going to elaborate because it's in the public domain, so you can read what that was all about. And then there's the infamous Tuskegee experiment. So it's things like that that remind us that, you know, can we really trust the scientific community to play it straight with us? So I want to acknowledge this distrust and the source of the distrust. So in response to that, I thought that as an individual, I want to try and chip away at that distrust by presenting myself as somebody that my community back in Makassar can relate to, somebody that looks like them, that talks like them, and went to school with them, as somebody who can, they can invest trust in as a proxy, if you like. Because inevitably, when you study the scientific subjects, it's inevitable that you gain insights and you gain an understanding beyond the obvious things that are out there. And you also understand how this can be used for good. There is a long journey ahead if we are going to have better levels of trust. But the truth of the matter is that we do not have the luxury of time. And this is why, for example, we see healthcare workers, they will happily accept the hepatitis B vaccine, which, you know, we must have as frontline workers. But yet some of them are hesitant to take the COVID vaccine, and they say, well, you know, we've got issues and the development was so rapid, etc. And unfortunately, during the time taken to formulate their arguments against vaccination, people are still getting sick and people are dying. And I think as an existential gesture of compassion, I'm taking my second dose of the vaccine to demonstrate good behavior and compassionate behavior towards my fellow human being, because I don't know, I could be an asymptomatic carrier with a new strain, who knows? And that's why I continue to wear a mask when I'm out, even though I've got the first dose on board and I'm now relatively protected against the wild type. So there's a variety of reasons, but I think we need to come back to this issue of the mistrust, and we must do better to work harder at reestablishing a certain level of trust that will steer us clear from going down a rabbit hole with specific technical questions about why A, B, and C happened or did not happen, and so on and so on. Because that,
And
yeah, I'll finish that.
And we out of time. To my colleagues, I think what Prof. you did was to say vaccine is important because it is a way of getting out of this and saving more lives. I think, Dr. Wilskut, you were very clear about dialogue, relationships, and now you reinforce the notion of trust in something that can help us out of that. And I think, Dr. McMaster, you have again, aptly helped us to think through our co-created responsibility, but you've also emphasized a number of important things like justice as well. I thank you all.
Derek,
I thank all our
Derek,
people. Yes.
Can I just acknowledge? I think there was a last comment from Dion Franks. I think he's actually making a good point. Just to say that what he's saying there is exactly the things that's confronting us as a church, you know. But unfortunately, I think I see signs that we are drawn back to the old, unfortunately. I call it even the power of institutionalism. And we must continue to fight that. That's all I can say. So it's a journey, Dion. I really hope that we can help one another in the church to continue this journey, to continue the critical thinking that COVID has sort of loosened in us. We are not where we're supposed to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for all those that have joined the webinar. I'm always wanting to propose to the church that we have a weekly or 2 weekly discussion of this nature, because I think it's so critical. Many questions, a lot of answers, so much to digest, and so much still to unpack. But on that note, I pray God's blessing upon each one of us over this Lenten time, and that our Easter will also become a remarkable one, both of walking through the valley of death and discovering the power of resurrection. God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you.
And to our panelists, thank you.
Zama, thank you.